Today we're going to look at Jesus' baptism, also as a way of looking at our own baptisms for those of us who were baptized as infants or as adults. It's part of a series of stories in the Gospels right now that are part of the Epiphany. Epiphany is the word that means showing forth, manifestation, the coming out, if you will. Last week we had the story from Matthew's Gospel just before this one about the three magi, the three astrologers from the east who looked for something that they had never seen before, something divine that drew them from all that was familiar to leave their homes and traverse the globe in search of it by following a star. It was a showing forth of God, and it represented a coming out in its way that the God incarnate in Jesus was no longer going to be solely the religion of the Jews and the Jewish people, but rather would mean something for the whole world. The particular God of a chosen people could be available to all people, regardless of religion or culture or background. And that one insight is in itself startling. Until then, religions belonged to peoples. And we proceed sometimes in Christianity as if it belongs somehow to us. But can we believe, as they believed, that there was something in the birth of Jesus, some showing forth of divinity that was greater than time, culture, nationality, religious identity? The Magi came, saw, worshiped, were transformed, and kept moving. Didn't say that they then converted to Judaism and became members of the local synagogue. And no, they moved on. They appreciated. They saw something of value. They didn't need to co-opt it or corrupt it or domesticate it or own it. They enjoyed it and experienced it, and it opened their minds and their bodies and their spirits to see the world differently. This is what the baptism of Jesus also tells us, that experiences of divinity are meant to open us up, to see wider, to see broader, to experience more. If our religion results in a smaller world, then we've missed the point. Religion is meant to expand and enlarge and inspire our imaginations, our spirits, our bodies, how we live. Jesus chooses carefully a ritual from ancient tradition to symbolize the new work that he is about to do. And he does it in such a way that the values he stands for are evident in the manner in which he chooses to reveal it. And I want to suggest to us that Jesus' baptism, while significant historically, also means something to us today, just in the same way that I hope your own baptism, if you were baptized, meant something to you or means something to you. When we take a past event and infuse it with contemporary meaning, that's what liberation is about. We're not tyrannized by it, the past. We're not defined or limited by it. We're inspired by it to make it our own and to experience here and now what people have experienced in the past. If we only come to church and rehearse ancient rituals because our ancestors did it, but they don't really speak to us anymore, well, eventually they fall into disuse. But what a loss. They meant something, and they can mean something still. Baptism, all the sacraments that we observe in church, whether we call them sacraments or rites or sacramentals, are meant to capture a moment where something happens internally, spiritually, and then we reflect it in the material world, because when an idea is enacted through our bodies, it makes a much stronger impression on us, and it changes us and changes the world. If we think of spiritual freedom only as something in the mind, but the world doesn't look freer as a result of our spirituality, then we haven't yet lived into the full intent of God for us and how we should live. So baptism, whether it's Jesus' baptism or the baptism we experience as a child or as an adult, isn't just meant to look back. It's meant to look forward. Later in the service, the ministers will sprinkle water on those of you who wish to receive it, and those of you who are sitting next to people who wish to receive it. And you know what? I'm sorry about that. We tried to figure out how could we do that differently, because choice is at the heart of healthy spirituality. So I invite you, if you're sitting nearby, if you're collaterally dunked, to think of it as rain, or think of it as some gentle, renewing, cleansing presence. Don't try to fit your spirituality into other people's boxes. Enlarge it, redefine it, make it your own. But in a few minutes, the clergy will sprinkle those who wish and those nearby with this water to recall us not to the past, but into the present, so that it feels as vivid to us as it was intended for us to feel when we had it the first time. I was baptized as a child. I know other people in the room were too. We weren't consulted. And yet, I have come to appreciate that my parents wanted to give something to me that meant something to them. And that's the whole purpose of godparents. You know, they say yes because you're too young to say it for yourself. But there's an intention there that people will pay attention to your spiritual life as important as your material life. That's why they say yes for you. It's not just a ritual that you do. And for those of you who are baptized as young people or as teenagers or adults, good for you. I have a kind of envy, I think, and maybe others do too, that you got to choose it. I'm sure it meant something to you. I know that many people have described it as, well, it's not exactly choice. When you hear the 17th repetition of "just as I am," there's a certain peer pressure to go forward to the water. Still, for a moment, imagine Jesus' excitement. Try to capture for a moment the excitement and love that people may have had for you when you were baptized. Maybe you felt it and feel it still. Be open to it. Baptism continues to reveal, and also it can never be taken from you. I want to renounce as heresy any notion that a promise made to you by God and symbolized by water can ever be broken by human error. What do I mean by that? If you were ever baptized and later in life told you somehow didn't belong in the faith community, that person committed a grave error, because you cannot take what is God's to give. You know, I was thinking about that with the 1,000 or so married couples now in Utah that the government has temporarily placed in this kind of legal limbo. But if I could say something to them, it's kind of what I want to say about baptism too. The devil didn't give it, and the devil can't take it away. God gives us grace. Only God. No human can take it from us. And when they try to, it says something about them, not about God, and not about us. So baptism, as freighted as it is sometimes with a past of abuse, I still think it has something beautiful to offer to us. Water, the waters of creation, the waters that were present in Genesis, the waters that Moses parted at the Red Sea, so that people who once were slaves, when they went into the water, when they came out of the water, were free. Water present at birth. Water that refreshes and renews. I will never forget my years in San Francisco when our Social Service Foundation started renting the local public high school gym on weekends to provide hot showers for people who did not have permanent homes, the undomiciled, the homeless, as we say. And the enormous gratitude expressed by people who said, you've no idea what it means not to be able to take a hot shower for granted. So water, renewing water. Jesus, according to Matthew 3:11, came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by John. I love these simple phrases in the Bible. They're so rich. Jesus, John's cousin, came from Galilee, from his family, because he was ready to make a change, and because he wanted to do things differently, and because he wanted to reform the world, or maybe make a revolution happen. He was impatient, and his impatience led him to make a new beginning, and he wanted to symbolize it. He wanted people to see it. He wanted to do it in public so that people would know he was serious about this change in his own life and the change he hoped to effect in the world. He goes from Galilee to John, his cousin, at the Jordan to be baptized by him. Baptism is a ritual practiced in Judaism. It's a bath. It's a ritual bath. It means you go into the water one way and you come out of the water different. There are many reasons to do it: for conversion, for new life. Jesus publicly wants to engage in this ritual act by another reformer. John the Baptist and Jesus come from the same family. They're engaged in social change. They use different strategies. One is more extreme and tries to change from the margin. Jesus tries to change from within with some success until it's not successful. And yet, Jesus comes to John, who's known for this public ritual of beginning again, and says, I need to be baptized by you. I need to be baptized, or I want to be baptized. And there's a story, in an apocryphal book called Gospel to the Hebrews, in which Mary says to Jesus, who is standing by the Jordan, Jesus, I think perhaps you could benefit from this baptism. And Jesus says, oh, ridiculous. Why would I need to be baptized? And then he says, except by saying what I just said, I guess I realize why I need to be. So an apocryphal story, and yet I think it gets at the heart of who Jesus is. If we want to worship Jesus as fully evolved, then we're missing an important part of what Jesus can be for us as a model. He changes. He grows into his understanding of liberation, of salvation. He's not fully accomplished at the beginning of his journey. He is in a process. And so he comes and asks John to baptize him because he wants to do something that will symbolize the values of the reform in which he is about to engage. And I say this to us because I think this is the year of Cathedral of Hope reinvention, Cathedral of Hope renewal, Cathedral of Hope reformation, Cathedral of Hope revolution. And the process is as important as the result. Whether it's the committee to select the new senior minister, or whether it's this diversity retreat on Saturday that I want to urge you to think about coming to, even if it's not on your calendar. We're going to, in 3 hours, look at what we could do over the course of the next year to increase diversity in the cathedral. And I say this because, with great love now, I've been here long enough to say this, I feel part of you as well as someone here to work with you. That as great as this cathedral is, wouldn't it be better if, for example, our 85% male congregation could say with integrity at the end of this year, we are more mixed, male, female, transgender, than we have ever been before. And it's as important to the men as it is to the women. And it's as important to the non-trans people as it is to the trans people. How we do our process could influence the result. Wouldn't it be great if we could say our congregation historically, predominantly, European American, white, Caucasian, however you want to say it, with significant presence and participation of people who are not. What if by the end of this year we looked like Dallas looks? Wouldn't that be better? What if instead of being a congregation of 50-something, we more broadly had a spectrum of age participation? I'm naming these diversities because I think they're achievable for us, not because I think that we're bad for not reflecting them yet. And how we do our business together this year could influence our future. Jesus wanted to make a statement about what his movement would stand for. So that's my pitch for the diversity retreat on Saturday. It's as important as the search committee. Jesus, thinking about what statement to make, comes to John and says, "Baptize me." And John says, "I think not. I'm not worthy to baptize you." Even though we're trying to achieve a change, let's perpetuate the same hierarchies that have plagued religion in the past. You're better than me, you should baptize me, I can't baptize you. Jesus gently says to John, how we do what we do will influence the result. And this is our opportunity to say to the world, we are doing spirituality in a new way. One where there is no superior and inferior. One where there is no master and servant. One where there is no priest and penitent. We are fellow journeyers together. And I want to do this publicly, spiritually with you, so that people see that we are serious about what we are doing together as part of our spiritual commitment. John, having engaged Jesus in dissent, how cool is that? You know, religion that suppresses dissent, that's not Christianity. It might look like Christianity, it might call itself Christianity, but when people tell you what to believe and say, well, we have the authority, it's the worst exercise of authority because there's no choice involved. Real spiritual community is based on choice. And that's why I love this verse. Then John consented. It's not John submitted. John consented after dialogue, after listening to each other. And so John conducts this baptism. And what does it mean? Jesus enters into the water and comes out different. And you know what that's like? I have been baptized by immersion or rebaptized. My church in Northern California, my last church, used to, with the other MCC churches in Northern California, go to the Russian River in Guerneville every summer and have baptisms in the river. And most of us had been baptized before. But I'll tell you something, when you go under the water and someone's holding on to you and you feel the tug of the water and you realize, don't let go. And the water's cold and bracing and you're underneath it even just for a moment, and you come back up out and you gasp for breath, and the first thing you think is, oh my God, I am so glad I am alive. You don't have time to think about what you have not done. You don't have time to regret. The natural impulse after birth or rebirth is to make a noise and to say, anything is possible. If you've been in a coma, you know what I'm talking about too. I've had that experience, I've told you that. When you come out of it, you are so glad to have the opportunity to do it again, whatever it is, every single breath. Thank you, God, for this new life, for this new opportunity. That's what Jesus experienced in that moment. And I believe it's from that moment that he derived what he needed in order to stand up on principles and stand before people who challenged him, and to transgress social boundaries, and to speak to women in public, and to heal lepers, and to say to religious authorities, you are oppressing people, and you have been given the great privilege of freeing them. It's because he remembered that moment of coming up out of the water, saying, life, life, life. That's what Jesus wants for us to experience too. And do you know what voice he heard? It wasn't, you didn't finish this. You didn't get to that. You're so imperfect. He heard a voice from heaven, a voice from somewhere that said, you are my beloved. I am so pleased with you. And this is the place from which we must reinvent Cathedral of Hope. And this is the place from which I hope you will engage your spiritual life when you renew your baptism, or every time you take a shower and feel the water that reminds you of it. You are my beloved. I'm delighted with you. What if every child, every morning, from the earliest time of consciousness, could say this? Every time I awakened, the first thing I heard was, you are my beloved. I'm thrilled with you. What if the first voice we heard at the beginning of the day, when God adds a new day to our life, when we wake up, we don't think first, eek, work, or eek, I didn't do this or that, but we listen for the voice of God that says, you are my beloved. I'm delighted with you. If that was the basis from which we proceeded on a day-to-day basis, there is no miracle of transformation that we could not achieve. You know, as a cathedral, we have participated in miracles of transformation, and they sometimes go unusual directions. Yesterday's New York Times had an article about a minister named Oliver White at Grace Community Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. A year and a half ago, you might recall that this group of people, raised $15,000 and sent it to this congregation in St. Paul, who had lost significant membership because they had taken a stance in favor of equal marriage rights. And that $15,000 wasn't enough to prevent them from losing their building. But yesterday's New York Times has a lovely profile of Reverend Oliver White, who is now co-pastoring at Clark Memorial United Church of Christ in St. Paul. A small white congregation, and the members of his congregation are joining with theirs. And so now there's 60 or 65 members integrated for the first time. Their passion and their risk-taking around equal marriage rights has led them to achieve something in regard to racial segregation that couldn't have been anticipated, but which is as important as the equal marriage stance and does not come at the cost of it. This is how new life begins, and it leads places we can't expect. Listen, listen, listen for the voice that says to you, you are my beloved. With you, I am well pleased. In a moment, we'll renew baptism for those who wish, and I'm going to ask those of you who wish to stand to sing Spirit of the Living God. It's okay to sit and remain seated. Pray for people who want to make a spiritual renewal in their lives today. That's a gift you can give them. Now let's stand, those who wish to, and sing Spirit of the Living God before we renew our baptism.